That's the puzzle. So now you were asking about the curse of knowledge. Well, here's how I've also thought to say it. We're all walking around with a waking dream that we think tells us how the world works. We see people over there using something, we see ourselves buying something, and we think we know why they're doing it. And we think we know why we're doing it. I heard this phrase the other day, which I think is right, that if there's one thing that the social sciences have really figured out over the last few decades, it's that we are opaque to ourselves. That is, we don't really know why we're doing anything. We don't really know why other people aren't doing anything. That doesn't stop us from having the illusion that we do.
Hey everyone, I'm Larry Weeks. Welcome to another episode of the Bounce Podcast. You know, we talk a lot about challenges and resilience on the pod, and outside of health concerns, physiology, and things of that nature, there's nothing more challenging than the world of business and entrepreneurship for a host of reasons. And for businesses, especially when facing customer indifference and that delicate balance between innovation and market reality. And that's the topic today. And for those of you who don't have a keen interest in business-related topics, I would encourage you to listen to this because it's very applicable to anything really challenging, from relationships to work-related issues. If you're an employee, learn these concepts and apply them and work with your director, manager, VP, CEO, whatever. My guest is Professor Merrick Furst. Merrick runs commercialization and new venture creation and directs undergraduate programs and faculty development in the College of Computing at Georgia Tech. Prior to Georgia Tech, he was professor at UC Berkeley, president of the International Computer Science Institute at Berkeley, and CEO of Essential Surfing Gear, Inc., which was sold in 2000. He's also the founder of an anti-botnet startup called Damballa. And earlier, he was professor and associate dean in the School of Computer Science at Carnegie Mellon, and we chat about that a bit. Mark is also known for his seminal research in algorithms, complexity theory, and AI. He co-invented probabilistic circuit analysis and planning graphs, which are considered among the most influential breakthroughs in the field of AI planning. Merrick is also the author of The Heart of Innovation, a field guide for navigating to authentic demand, which is the touchstone of this podcast. So on the show, we discuss things like validation, authentic demand, and the challenges businesses and startups face with creating products that truly meet customer needs. So we explore all these concepts and ideas and problems. We talk about artificial intelligence right out of the gate because of his background. We talk about innovation and failure as it applies to business and why new businesses and products fail. And we discuss the power of observing customer behavior, not just listening to what a customer says, but also observing what they do. And we go into a lot of detail about authentic demand. Interesting. And we discuss the curse of knowledge and cognitive illusion, where innovators assume customers understand and need their product. And our discussion includes examples of product failures. And I just wanted to say that as I was talking to Merrick, there was this flashing light in my brain throughout about the importance of humility and being open-minded. It's critical in life. It seems self-evident on the face of it, but we have a lot of bias. That's one. Number two, if you're a successful CEO, entrepreneur, whatever, you usually have to have a lot of conviction, right? Or belief in your hunch, so forth and so on, which is very important. But if you can't modulate that, dial that down, and listen to customers as to what they want, you're going to hit some brick walls. So I think you'll enjoy it. Give it a listen. And without further ado, here's Merrick. You're at Georgia Tech?
I'm a distinguished professor at Georgia Tech, which just I think means I have gray hair. But I've been here for about 20 years. Before this, I was professor at Berkeley. I ran an institute at Berkeley, and I got recruited there from Carnegie Mellon, where I spent a lot of my career as a professor and a dean.
Very cool. Merrick, I saw that you are also involved, deeply involved in AI. Could you share a bit about that?
AI, yeah. And by the way, the kind of AI I did was people now are doing these kind of deep neural networks and large language models. So I know a little bit about it, but that's not the area that I was most involved in. But yeah, well, it's definitely different. I mean, there's a new phenomena. Stable Diffusion and DALL-E and the ability to generate pictures that are quite amazing. You're starting with text. That's could never do that before. And then these large language models, they seem really different to me in the sense that they're not brittle. Like all computers, everything you ever typically do with a computer is like you go a little bit, make a little bit of a mistake, and it kind of doesn't work, or it only accepts input of a certain form. You interact with these
Syntax errors and what have you. Yeah.
yeah, for example, syntax errors, or it doesn't give you the right button at the right time. But these large language models are strange that you interact with them and it feels pretty seamless. So that's different. I probably disagree with some folks about whether or not these are threats to our, short-term threats to our existence, or at least not the way that people think it is. And happy to tell you how I've come to think about what GPT-4 is doing when you interact with it, and what it's convincing you of, or what it feels like. I have a take on that seems serviceable. Well, there's a threat. I mean, I do think there's a threat. I mean, the fact that these things, they seem like it's, what else do we ever know that talks to us? It's like other people. So these things can now, they write back to us in English, for example, or other languages. So that's weird and that's different. And I do worry that they're going to be polluting our communication channels. So already I'm getting emails from people that I pretty much would never have gotten emails from before, that are formatted and they sound really nice. And it's a lot harder. They're getting through filters for sure. And they're a lot harder for me to say I'm going to ignore them until I realize that they're kind of bland and probably written by like a large language model. So I delete them. But they used to sound like broken English and people were really trying to figure something out. Now they pass that through a GPT filter and it's doesn't feel as human anymore. But I think that's going to get worse and worse. And then these things are going to definitely create lots of disinformation in our normal communication channels. So that's a short-term threat that feels very real to me. I'm not personally as worried about these things all of a sudden waking up one day and deciding to either turn us all into paper clips or to decide that we don't belong here and they should take over. That doesn't strike me as anywhere on the horizon. The thing that's so interesting about these is how confusing they are. Like, have you played with them? Have you done a chat with a
Yeah,
chat?
I've actually got a platform, Merrick, that it's an analytics platform, but then I was early on in the OpenAI sandbox and plugged
Mm,
into them and used them for content generation,
right.
which is right now kind of the best use case. Maybe some coding, QA type stuff, but mostly content. Yeah.
What's hard for people to notice is how is this technical? I like this idea. It's called the beholder share. Like a person looks at a painting, and you bring something to the painting. Like if you look at a pointillist painting in some scene along the river in Paris, they're just little dots. But somehow you look at it and say, "Aha! Well, it looks like a picnic, and it looks like people strolling along the river." You bring that to the painting. That's not really there in the painting. That's a lot of what we're doing without even realize we're doing it when we read what these large language models are producing. There's a big part of it where it says something and we project onto it that there must be something behind it that's understanding what it's saying.
Right.
But it's not. It's not. There's no way that it's understanding what it's saying. It's just saying stuff that you can feel as though it's understanding it's understanding something. So that's different, right? Although I'm not 100% sure it's different. So, a lot of people I hang out with, they're college educated or they're researchers, and they spend a lot of time in school learning how to say things that actually correspond to things that they understand. A lot of human beings are just saying stuff.
We have predictive processing in our brains. That's
It
part of the
seems like.
neural networks. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that a lot of people may not actually, if you push them on what they're saying, they may not actually understand it either. You're just saying stuff that sounds right. I don't want to get, probably get hate mail if I start going down the path of, you listen to people that are conspiracy theorists, words are coming out of their mouth, sounds like stuff. And then you have to stop and say, well, what are they actually, is there some mental model behind that that's actually plausible? And the answer is, I don't think so. But that doesn't stop them from saying the stuff and for other people believing the stuff. So, maybe these large language models aren't that different from people that just spew stuff without having a mental model. That's one thing I wonder
No,
about.
that's interesting analogy because I do think, you consume enough of that conspiracy, whatever the craziness is. Now that's in your model, that's in your database, and people haven't proved or disproved it. They just regurgitating it. So that's in
Yeah.
that they've been
Yeah.
trained on
So
that. It's kind of a
yeah,
training
yeah.
set. Yeah.
So okay, so here's my current. I think about this a lot. So I'll tell you my current best take on all this. If there's some subject you want to talk about, and there's some group in the world that talks about that all the time, and they're really good at talking about that. It's been studied by GPT, by the large language models. So you can start talking to, let's say, GPT-4, and you say, "Oh, talk to me about this subject in mathematics, like I was a talented high school student, or talk to me about this subject about politics." Or you take any subject that human beings have gotten good at talking about, and GPT, these large language models, will actually talk to you about that subject the way the best people who talk about that subject talk about it. That doesn't mean it knows what it's talking about. It's just talking the way the best people talk about it, which can be incredibly helpful, I think, if you're willing to like say, okay, well, explain this complicated math
Exactly.
context, or
Yeah.
explain this complicated finance thing to me in a way that I can understand it. And you go, and then, but don't take it for actually telling you anything that's real. Just take it for this is how people who are really good at this talk about it. And then you can then impose upon that your understanding. So now, okay, I'm going to talk to it about this, the way people talk about it, and I'm going to also care about whether it makes any sense because it has no way of knowing whether it's making any sense. It's just talking. I think that I find that helpful. In fact, I
Yeah. Yeah.
myself have found it useful to try to learn something. It starts telling me things about this kind of mathematics, and I say, "Well, that doesn't make any sense. What about this?" And it says something else. It's not like really thinking, it's just telling me how a person who's talks like this would talk. And
Yeah.
then I can adjust my own thinking until I get a mental model that's pretty good. I think it's good for that.
It's great. I just the other week or so ago, I was watching CNBC, and there's some interest rate discussion, short term, long term rates, and there was, and I don't remember specifically what it was, but something I was kind of confused about. So I just put it in chat and said, "Explain this to me," and it did. I got a better understanding of it. Then where I didn't understand it, I said, "Well, then explain this piece." And it became reductive to the point of getting to my level where I learned something. It was cool. I thought,
Right.
well, so it,
Yeah. It's also very obsequious. Like you can say, well, no, that it explains something to you, and you say back to it, well, no, that doesn't make any sense, even though it does. And it says, oh, you're right. Then it changes its opinion or changes what it says. So, it doesn't really it doesn't know right from wrong. It doesn't know yes, good, real from not real. It just
yeah,
talks like it does. And maybe that's the biggest danger is that and it's a threat to our sense of self. Like, who are we?
mm,
If you're
yeah.
talking and I'm feeling as though there's somebody there, you're not just saying words. I don't know. How do I even know there's somebody here inside of me is saying these things? Like, how would you
Mhm.
know? So it's good. There's some
The ghost in the
interesting
shell.
kind of,
Yeah. Thank you
yeah,
for indulging me on that topic. I want to get into, so first of all, loved your book.
thanks.
And I've had James Altucher on a couple of times, and
Oh,
it
yeah.
was your conversation with him that piqued my interest to dive deeper. So thank you for having the conversation.
Oh,
And
yeah.
but it left me with a ton of
It's been an ongoing conversation for, I don't know, 30 some odd years. Yeah.
yes, you guys are known each other for a while, but and he's a great guy. But it left me a lot of questions, Merrick. So I want to get into them because
Okay.
there's some gold in them. There hills that I want to excavate or mine. Let's jump into the failure part of businesses. So there, and I love the way you kind of framed it in the book. There's new businesses and products being launched as you and I speak, or being
Mm,
planned to be launched, or in the middle of launch, it's been a year or two. They're out there trying to scale or get market share, or companies are spinning out innovation projects. Innovation seems to be a buzzword nowadays, and I was involved in a couple of years ago a skunk work project at a hospital, and I did a little bit of consulting as to what they were doing. They're trying to innovate, right, and kind of catch up with what's happening digitally out there in the world, which is all great. This is all great. you you have some great failures listed in your book. Microsoft's Bob, by the way, which I
oh, yeah.
like. The Apple Newton. I thought of the Apple Newton. I thought that's a cool, the PDA, but it failed. But you listed some others. By the way, I didn't know Hot Wheels and Barbie had a computer, so that was interesting. Some kind
Okay,
of
good.
branded computer. But you state in the book that the cause of all this innovation failure isn't a mystery; it's customers. And one of the cognitive illusions that you state that would contribute to these failures is the curse of knowledge. Could you explain the curse of knowledge? I assume it
Yeah.
means
And if I
it's an assumption. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, so let me get to that in a second, but let me say it's not the only cause of failure.
Right.
It's
Right.
just kind of there are a lot of things that people do where look, the world is a noisy place and it tries to kill a lot of things. So there's that problem. There's also people make execution errors or money doesn't show up at the right time. So there's lots of ways that startups fail. But the way that most startups fail, which is invisible to people, is that they make things that people are indifferent to. Like if you make something and people don't care, that's pretty problematic. And part of the reason, well, you wouldn't normally make something if you knew people weren't going to care, you wouldn't make it. So how does it happen that people make things and then it turns out that your customers don't care? That's this kind of curse of knowledge. It's like it makes sense to you that they would care, and they've said all sorts of things to you that tell you that they would care, and then the people that are funding you are convinced that people are going to care, and your team convinces themselves that they're going to care, and then you make it, and then you discover, holy cow, the world's actually indifferent to what I made. That's a very common thing that happens. In fact, when we work with early stage founders, one of the things I can say to them is, look, if you have more demand than you can handle, that's a different set of problems. But if you don't, then finding an authentic demand that is what feels like more demand than you can handle, that's the puzzle. So now you were asking about the curse of knowledge. Well, here's how I've also thought to say it. We're all walking around with a waking dream that we think tells us how the world works. We see people over there using something, we see ourselves buying something. We think we know why they're doing it, and we think we know why we're doing it. I heard this phrase the other day, which I think is right, that if there's one thing that the social sciences have really figured out over the last few decades, it's that we are opaque to ourselves. That is, we don't really know why we're doing anything. We don't really know why other people aren't doing anything. That doesn't stop us from having the illusion that we do. So, in the book, I tell the story about this company, Damballa, that we started because some people at Georgia Tech came to me and they said, we have this technical ability to figure out a certain kind of fraud on the internet. Would you help us start a company? I thought I knew back then, it's a long time ago now, that you shouldn't start a company unless there are customers. So I had a friend who was at eBay. He was the chief information security officer at eBay. And I flew out to eBay and I told him what these guys thought they could do technically. And he said, oh, wow, that'll save us. He and his team actually said, oh, wow, that'll save us $40 million. How much would it cost? And I made up a number. I said $150,000. And he said, go home and make it. So, right there, okay, it was going to save him $40 million a year. It was going to cost him $150,000. The chief information security officer told me to go home and make it. His team was all interested in it. And I flew home and we started this company. We raised money for it. And eBay never bought that product, even though we tried to deliver something that worked. So if you see the curse of knowledge, it's like I thought I knew that people buy things to save money. They don't tell you to go make something unless they're interested in buying it. It was just an all waking dream of how the world works. Now I look at myself and I think about that and I say, there was nothing in that whole interaction that should have made me think that they were going to be a customer. Nothing. I mean, it would have made sense after the fact if they were customers, but there was nothing in that should have led me to think they were customers.
But even though they said go make it, it's going to save us money. That
Yeah. I mean,
at
this
the
is,
time, I think I would have thought the same thing, right?
yeah. I think lots of people still, and I probably still make the mistake myself. But here's the kind of question here's what I've learned, which is that lots of things make sense, but here's a nicer question. It's not will they buy? That, they might buy, but that's not the right question. The right question is, will they not buy? Like, is it okay for them to not buy? This is a big insight, we explore in the book a lot, which is in our waking dreams, people are doing all sorts of stuff, but what we don't ask ourselves is, well, are there alternatives that are also okay? Because if there are alternatives that are also okay, then you don't really know what they're doing. So what makes someone a customer, this is just part of what we've learned. Here's what makes somebody a customer. They find themselves in a situation in which not buying is not okay. And you can just see that. Like if not buying is okay, maybe you can convince them to buy, but they're not really a customer. They're just someone you convince to buy. So what you're looking for when you're looking for to see whether a person's a customer, you're looking for this thing we call non-indifference, which is you're simply asking the question, is it okay for them to not buy? And if it's okay for them to not buy, they're not customers. What you're really looking for is not buying, not okay. We call that the not principle, which takes some getting used to. So here's the question I wish I had asked the people at eBay. I wish I had said, okay, we might come back with this done. Is it okay to not buy? Like, is it okay to not save $40 million? Or do you have other ways to save $40 million? I'm sure that if I had asked my friend the question, does eBay have other ways to save $40 million or to make up that gap? That he would have listed 5 or 10 immediately. I mean, they could have just added like a nickel or a quarter to every transaction, and they already make up the 40 million. And the truth is, they're not doing any of those. So, okay, so I would just show up with one more way that they could save money. That would be one more way that one more thing that they don't do to save money. And that's what I meant by the curse of knowledge. It's like, it never even occurred to me to ask the question. It's like I was just sure I was right. And if you are sure you're right, you don't even notice that you might be wrong. And so, because once you notice you might be wrong, you can go check. So in some ways, the waking dream or the curse of knowledge or this basic problem of being wrong is that you don't notice you're wrong when you're wrong. You only notice you're wrong when you discover you're wrong. And then it's often too late.
So let's stay with this context, and then I want to get into the details of the not. But had eBay, I'm trying to frame up the opposite of what happened, where they initially gave some signals that weren't strong enough, or
what makes you think there were signals? I'll think of it another way. I think what happened
because this was going to save us. I
left that office very happy. I did. He knew what answer I was looking for. I was looking for the answer. This would be
I would have been
meaningful.
happy too. I would have,
The signal he sent me was what I probably should have worried about was, is he just showing me the way to get to the door and we're still friends and I'm all excited? Because that's what he did. He got me out of his office. I was feeling very happy. He gave me the answer I was looking for. He knew what answer I was looking for.
And you didn't doubt it.
I left happy.
Yeah.
What?
Okay. And you didn't doubt it.
I didn't want to doubt it. I wanted to go home and start a company. So he gave me an excuse.
And that's the challenge of the curse of knowledge in a sense, because you had a bias of, God, this is, I think this is a good idea. And that kind of bolstered that bias, or that what you were thinking.
As human beings, we're very talented. We have lots of experiences and skills. And like, if you notice something, you can work on it. The problem is, what if you're not noticing something that's important or meaningful? And a lot of what goes wrong is we don't notice that we don't notice. And so a lot of what the book is about is how do you manage that? Because if you could notice stuff, then you can work on stuff. But if you don't notice stuff, you can't work on it, and you're sort of left to, whatever happens in the world. And then this question of failure, it turns out, since we don't notice that we don't know why people are doing things actually, we make things that have nothing to do with the people that we're making them for. And when we only discover that once we hand it to them or show it to them or try to get them to buy it, and then their reaction to it is indifference. And that happens so often, and people don't really have a good idea of why. And the book is an explanation of why and then what to do about that.
You give a great illustration, I thought, with the hummingbird. Is it the hummingbird fish finder?
Hummingbird, yeah, that's great.
Or hummingbird.
They left out the G. There's a funny story there. The name of the company is Hummingbird without the G. And my friend Jim Balcom tells a very funny story. He said at one point they were wondering whether or not they could trademark it, and the lawyers said, "There's no way you can trademark that because hummingbird is a very common name." And a few weeks later, an employee came in all excited and said, "We got the trademark." They said, "How did you do that?" And they looked at it and they realized that the employee had left out the letter G. But they have to understand that the company was based in Eufaula, Alabama, where they pronounce hummingbird as hummingbird. So he didn't know that there was a G. That's a good story.
That's great. But this was a fish finder that was doing $1 million or $6 million, what have you. There was a level of success there, and Jim was the CEO, right? And he's projecting that the market is, I don't know, 60 million or something like that. So,
I thought it was like 50 some odd million a year. Yeah.
But just couldn't get there. Had a team of developers or engineers, what have you, creating new features, new products, what have you. Nothing was working.
Yeah, he couldn't. Yeah. So the original company started at that time. People had developed these complex sonar systems for commercial fishing fleets. And Jim's first partner, who died along the way, Yang Ding, occurred to him that you could, there's a market among hobbyists or people that have recreational bass fishing boats. So he figured out a way to take these old Heathkit sonar things and turn them into something you could drop off the back of your recreational boat to see where the fish were, kind of like what the commercial fishermen were doing, where it really mattered to them. They got it to 6 million in sales, and they were sure that the market was bigger. And they kept having, they did the normal, what everybody would, in Harvard Business School would tell you. They would have focus groups, they would have surveys, they would talk to their customers, trying to find out, like, what's wrong with this? Why can't we sell more of it? And people that they would talk to had all sorts of explanations. They said, well, sometimes it identifies wood floating on the bottom and tells us it's fish, but it's just wood floating on the bottom. So the engineers said, okay, we can fix that. They would make the squelch mechanism better. And some people would say, well, we're dropping our lines out of the boat, and we're really good as long as you're, looking for fish, you could tell us how deep it is here. So they built something with a little pixelated display that would show like how deep it was there so that people wouldn't catch no lines. But everything that they did had no effect on sales. And they had 9 new product introductions and 9 new product failures. Anybody who's ever been in a startup setting knows what this is like. You're trying to make your product be something people care about, and they keep telling you, well, it has to align with, it has to do this, or it has to, fit with this, or I wish it did one of these things. And then your product managers try to make that happen in the product, but then there's no change in the sales.
Did they ask? I'm just curious if if they asked why they bought it versus features.
Why did you buy it? I want to fish. I have a recreational fishing boat. I hate going out without, all those questions. They're not stupid. In fact, Harvard Business School and spending talented people.
Just crossing T's.
Yeah. And then, tell the story of how accidentally they figured something out. And this was totally by accident. This wasn't as part of their normal process. One of the women who was working there, a woman named Sue Simons, happened to be at a bass fishing shop, and she happened to see another woman at the end of the aisle reaching for a Humminbird fish finder. And Sue said to her, "Excuse me, would you mind telling me why you're buying that?" And this woman told her this following story. She said, well, this weekend I'm going to have to go out on my husband's boat again, and his friend Bubba is going to be there, and they're going to be in the back of the boat getting drunk. And my girlfriend and I have 4 kids between us, and they're going to be going crazy. I thought if I bought this for the boat, the kids would have something to play with. So in desperation, after 9 product failures and thinking about going bankrupt, Jim said, well, maybe we're in the recreational fishing market. Maybe this is more about entertainment than it is about finding fish. So he went back to his team, and I don't know if you've ever had a team, or any of your listeners have had a team, but trying to convince them to go from like making the best fish finder to making something which is, he said to them, look, take off a lot of the knobs so it doesn't look so complicated. Make it be multicolored so it looks more like a TV screen. Make it visible in bright daylight so people could look at it, like kids could look at it. They had to change their company to a consumer product company. And then they had this amazing thing happen, which is they were at $6 million in flat sales, and they thought the total market was like 53 million. Their first year sales was $75 million. And their second year sales was $125 million. Part of what's so interesting about that story, which first of all, we all want to be successful like that, but you can kind of do the thought experiment yourself. You can say, you have 2 different things. One is it gets better at finding fish, and the other is it entertains you on the boat, where your kids aren't miserable on the boat. All right, is not finding more fish okay? And the answer is, of course not finding more fish is okay. Like, if not finding more fish wasn't okay, they wouldn't be getting drunk in the back of the boat. They would be doing everything they could to find more fish. But is having a bad time on a boat when it's a recreational boat okay? And the answer is no. So one is a not, and the other isn't a not. Or the number of people for whom not finding more fish is not okay, is that's $6 million a year. The number of people for whom, not having a good time on your boat is not okay. That's a much bigger business. That's 125 million at least business.
So this is a great story, and I want to get to how you've either codified or formalized the process of this. But let me understand, because the not still hang me up, Merrick.
Okay. Yeah.
So just the word, but I think I get it.
I know it takes a little bit of time to.
Yeah.
Also, we all want to get rid of it, right? We all remember our high school teachers, English teachers, telling us, well, if you have a double negative, get rid of it. It turns out logically you can't really get rid of it here. It actually has a certain meaning. But anyway, keep going.
No, I have. So there's a good friend of mine. We both at Google. He was a group product manager, higher
Mm-hmm.
level than I am, and I read your book and told him about it, and he started reading, and he's like, I'm confused about the double negatives, but I think I get it. So consumers may not directly state a need for a certain product or feature, but their behaviors or preferences might imply it. Is that in the ballpark of a not? So is not interpreting subtle cues like what the lady noticed in the store?
Here's a very useful thing to just take as ground truth. You might as well just believe this. It's true. I believe it's true. It's not, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that it's true. If you want to understand people's behaviors, which we do because we're in business, we're trying to make things that people will reach for and buy and use. If you want to understand people's behaviors, it's more reliable to look at the situations that people are in that elicit those behaviors than it is to try to explain the behaviors in terms of things like preferences or something about the people. So a person who is a recreational fisherman, a recreational angler, they have a boat, they go out on the boat. Sometimes they have kids. Sometimes there are long periods of time when they're not finding anything. That's the situation. And in that situation, wouldn't it be odd to discover that they didn't reach for something that made it fun right then? That would just be odd. So that's what a not feels like. It at least gives you a sense of what it is that they might be reaching for when they reach for something that you're providing. It's like in this situation, not reaching for it would just somehow be not what you would expect. That's the way we've learned to think about this.
So that's interesting. It's behavioral, but it's the behavior based on the situation. Would it be proper to say it's implicit use behavior? Like,
Implicit use. Well, I guess it is in some ways implicit use. I mean, the technical term is that people reach for equipment, and that's like a carpenter who's got nails to hammer in, who's been trained at carpentry. They don't like pick up the back of their iPhone and bang with the iPhone. They pick up a hammer. So it's implicit in that sense. In fact, if you walked into somebody's office and you saw them using the back of their iPhone to sort of gingerly put in some nails in order to hang up some pictures, and you happen to have a hammer with you, if you put the hammer on the desk, it would be weird to see them not pick up the hammer. That's what a not looks like. Like not doing it's just not okay somehow. Of course, different people, different situations, different times, different cultures, those affect what would be not okay to not do. And that's what the entrepreneur's job is, or that's what the innovator's job is to see the situation so clearly that you can see how if you were to show up with something, not reaching for it is not okay. And what we found is that usually the explanations are actually kind of weird. They're not the kind of things that people have names for already. Like that was my problem, I believe, when I think back on the eBay thing. I thought people were making decisions based on how much money it would save them. Like I thought you walk in, you can show someone you can save them $40 million for 150,000. And just on that basis alone, that would be an explanation for why they would buy. It turns out that that doesn't seem like a safe way of thinking about people. In fact, these things we call authentic demands, which are characterized as being, not the alternatives are not okay. People always think that they are this, but they're almost never words that end in ER. Like people like safer, better, cheaper, faster. Those are almost never the authentic demands. It's like, people come to us, I mean, like when we work with founders, they say, well, I say to them, well, so what makes you think people are going to buy this? And they say, well, it'll make them safer. And I think, well, yes, it will make them safer, but what makes you think that they're going to buy this to be safer? And they say, well, because they're trying to be safer. And if I can get them to do it, I tell them, go out and talk to those people and ask them, are there other ways that they could be safer that they're not currently doing? And the answer is almost always yes, there are other ways they could be safer, and they're not doing those. So if you make a way for them to be safer, it's just one more way to be safer that they're not doing. So it doesn't really help you.
I like
Yeah.
that question. Are there other ways to be safer? Could I template that question? If there are other ways, then the question becomes, are you then doing that? Are you using the
And
other ways?
if you're not doing that, what makes what we're going to offer you any different than those things that you don't do?
Okay.
It's very interesting. Like people are walking around, I guess the world is walking around telling people, here's how you should make a startup. find out something that people want. Don't make something people don't want. Make something people want. The problem is that just doesn't help you at all, because if you just think about something you want that you don't buy, and then think about something else you want that you don't buy, there's just way more things that you want that you never buy. So if the startup makes something that the person wants, it's way more likely it'll just be one more thing that they want that they don't buy. It just doesn't give you any purchase at all. And then people say, well, what I meant was that they really want it. And I said, well, okay, let's go all the way they need it. Let's go all the way there. That can't be right either, because, just think of all the things you need to do that you never do. Those just aren't the right concepts, what we've learned. So that's why I've replaced it with this new concept. And the new concept is, don't explain it in terms of want or need or desire or safer or faster or better. Don't describe it that way at all. It just gets us confused. That's kind of the curse of knowledge. Instead, ask yourself the following question: is not buying it okay? Like, how come, is not buying it okay? And if not buying is okay, then you really don't have an authentic demand. So you have to find your way somehow to make it an understanding their situation well enough that you can really see how, if they don't buy this, it's really not okay.
Okay, so if there are other ways that they could solve the problem and they're buying those other ways,
Well, that's a different story. That's a different story.
That's not an inkling to me that there's some authentic demand in that pool.
Okay, so they're already buying something that does something you think is meaningful for them. That's what you're saying. So one question you could ask is, do you really understand why it is not buying that is not okay? So I would ask that first. Like, do you understand the authentic demand? Really, usually people don't. It's sort of made up. You don't really know why people are doing things, but okay. But let's say you figured that out. Well, at least then you know what an authentic demand is, because then you have another question, which is, could you displace the current thing? Like, is there status quo bias?
Right. There is that. That's almost implied in the question, are you buying something? But would it be a true statement to say, or what do you think of, do people not know on the surface why they're buying something unless...
I think people have no idea why they do anything.
Okay. That's what I thought. Yeah.
Which is weird, because you feel like you do. And we read all these books to explain what we do, but it's an illusion.
Yeah, you have the left hemisphere explaining what's going on after the fact. Rory Sutherland, this big old guy, he has his whole thing is people are irrational and we don't understand why they're doing what they're doing.
And then that whole practice, he's great, by the way. And that we've talked to him about this stuff too. That whole practice he has and the way he thinks about it is dead on. I mean, what's hard we found in practice is, okay, so if you know that people are irrational and you don't really know why they're doing any of the things that they're doing, and you want to figure out something that you can offer them that they would actually buy or reach for, how do you get there? That's the thing that, so it's one thing to say.
That's why I'm talking to you. That's why I'm talking to you.
Yeah. So this is something I think is actually something I'm recently discovering by doing podcasts is people can definitely glom onto the notion that, oh, I see. When they're buying, it must be the case that not buying was not okay. So I'm looking for something like that, but that's after the fact. If you're sitting here and you're trying to figure out something to make or do that for which you'll see them reaching for it because not reaching for it is not okay, how do you see it like in advance? How do you figure it out in advance? And that's what I think a lot of what we figured out in the book was, like, once you put it in this not form that tells you how to go into situations with customers and try to understand the structure of their world to see where they're indifferent. And then when you see how they're indifferent, you can try to locate where the non-indifferences are. And then the non-indifferences tell you the things that you're looking for. Because don't make something they can be indifferent to. Go figure out how it is that they're actually indifferent to a lot of things. Map that out. And what's left are the places where they're not indifferent. And it's a surprisingly subtractive process, which is also weird, because most people think, well, I'll add this feature, which is a very additive feature. Like, well, what if I could make it do this? And what if I could make it do that? This process is actually surprisingly the opposite, which is, say it like this: you want to know whether you should put a feature in or not? Here's the right question. If you don't put it in, can they be indifferent? And if they can be indifferent, then
wait a minute. If you don't put it in,
can
they be indifferent about you not putting it in?
Yeah, I have a product, and someone says to me, it should do this. And I say, okay, well, let me ask you a question. If it doesn't do that, are they able to be indifferent? And the other question is, if I do that, can they be indifferent? Those are both the same question. So what I really need to do is only do things which, if I do them, causes my customers to be not indifferent. That's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for The alternatives to using it are not okay. That's all I'm ever looking for.
Would that mean if I had the feature, put it out there, and then took it away, they would scream like, "Whoa!"
That's a perfectly interesting test, right? So, right. In fact, that's what a lot of this work looks like when you get to it, is you show people how to interact with their potential customers until somehow they show up and they act in a certain way that when they leave the room, the customer follows them because they can't help it. In fact, what an authentic demand looks like in practice is your customers feel like they're forcing you to make it, because not having it is not okay, really. It's not like you yes, this is a big problem with a lot of these startup ideas and innovation ideas is you put a good salesperson in a room with a customer and they can make the customer feel in that moment like they got to have it. But what you're really looking for is, okay, the customer on their own, when they understand what you're doing, they actually feel like they can't live without it, that not having it is really not okay. And what that feels like is they're trying to find a way to make you make it for them. And anybody who's actually ever experienced authentic demand knows that that's what it feels like. Part of what this is about is just making it safe for people to realize that's what it really has to feel like. It really has to feel like if you're somehow telling them that you know what it is that you could make and you've decided not to make it, you should feel as though they're going to try to convince you to make it.
So let me frame this into a product that already exists and it's got some level of
Great.
sales. Okay.
Okay.
And it versus, and I want to talk about just starting from scratch or
Okay.
launching us,
Sure.
whatever, because they seem to be very different challenges.
They're a little bit.
So you've got products that's selling and you're releasing new features. So one time I did a feature and it was a tier. So in other words, at a lower tier, you didn't
Right.
in the trial period, you would get some of the features, but they would go away because you weren't on the
Right.
premium tier, right? And I got some people saying, "Oh, this was I made a mistake where the premium feature I didn't take it away after us. It should have the backend system should have took it away immediately
Mhm.
after the trial, but inadvertently it was left in. As soon as it was taken out, people said, "What the hell? I want this. Why'd you take this?" And I said, "It was explicit in the text when you bought it that you didn't get that, but I gave it." But it was informative to me because I'm like, "Oh, this is great. People
Right.
want this feature." But I'm trying to figure out how to do that without putting something out and taking away. And I saw a survey once somebody sent me from a software company saying, "Here are the new features. Here's our roadmap." And it was interesting. It was the first time I saw this, Merrick. And you tell me, I don't even know if question and answer is the way to arrive at this because
Yeah.
it seems like observing behavior is crucial, but I don't know how you do that either for, let's say a digital product. So the survey said, "You want this feature? Would you like this feature? Yes. What if you never got this or if we took this away?
Yeah.
Or, how much do you like it? Would you feel indifferent?" They were actually, it sounded similar to some of some of your frameworks. And I'm wondering if that's possible. Can you do it with questions like that to say
It's
how
really
much
hard to
or
do
yeah,
surveys. It's really hard to do surveys, right? So I would just say, as of the whole world is filled with people that do surveys and they do focus groups. But for someone like me or the people we've worked on this, we're trying to make it so that it's more like engineering or more like science. So you ask yourself, okay, what is it that I would like to know? And how could I legitimately go about knowing it? And so if I want to know whether a person could be indifferent to something, well, how would I go about figuring that out? And so part of the work is to just also ask yourself, well, how would I know something? And there are a lot of things that you can't, maybe you can't at all, or you certainly can't easily know from a survey.
I
There's
like
so
that
many
question.
problems. I don't know if you,
How would I get to know something? What would I have to do to
yeah.
get to know something? Yes.
But this is something that I mean, we also invest in startups. So here's a change in my life over time doing this kind of work. It used to be that people would come and tell me about their business idea, and I would immediately have a sense of whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. And because I would feel like I saw this movie before and it crashed and burned, or this is a good idea, this could really work out. Now I say to myself, well, listen, that's like a curse of knowledge. That's me making up a story in my head. There's no way I really have an idea
You're
of what
making
that is.
assumptions based on past experience, which may not
Yeah, I'm
apply to,
making,
yeah.
our brains just spun out these stories. So now I ask myself a different question, which is, what this person's telling me, is that something that's even knowable? Like usually they're telling me why someone's going to buy something. And I ask myself, is that even in the category of knowable? And then I ask myself the question, well, have they actually gone to the trouble to know it? Like, have they figured it out? And so Most things I think aren't really knowable. Like if you tell me I really know why somebody's doing something, I think usually you don't really know. You say, I think they're buying it because they're trying to save money. And I'm thinking, I don't even think that's knowable. I don't. Then they tell me, here's how they found it out. They sent around the survey, and I'm thinking, wow, I know how hard it is to get surveys right. Like here's weird things about surveys. Here's what's known: the order in which you ask the questions in a survey determine the outcomes of questions in the survey. But there are these famous experiments that they asked. They would say, "How happy are you with your love life or your dating life?" Is one question. Another question might be, "When was the last time you had a date?" And it turns out those are totally reasonable questions. You just get different answers if you ask them in different orders. Like if you first ask someone, "When was the last time you have a date?" and then you ask them, "Are you happy with your dating life?" You get a different answer than if you first ask them, "How are you happy? Are you happy with your dating life? When was the last time you were dating?" So it's just so subtly difficult to construct surveys that I just want to suggest that surveys are they give you the sense that you know something, but it's really unlikely you know something. So if you really want to know something, don't use surveys. The other problem with surveys is, and this is what is strange from our experience, authentic demands turn out to be really weird. How would you describe the authentic demand for the fish finder? You say, well, for people that are recreational fishermen, go out with their families that, find it that their kids are bored and are looking for something to do. Okay, what's the one word explanation for that? There isn't a word. There is no explanation for that. That's a situation that creates an authentic demand, but there's no one word. It's not like safer, happier, more delighted. It's a situation. And so what we found doing this work is that authentic demands are weird. There just aren't enough nouns to go around to say what they are, which means that if you are forced to ask people a survey, then what you're putting into the survey are the words that you think you know that name the authentic demand. But what we're finding is for the most interesting authentic demands, which are the ones that people haven't noticed before, that, especially for startups or large companies that want to get into a new business, there isn't yet a word for it. And so you can't really ask questions about it.
I understand this. I'm trying to get to the how could one apply this, but let me
Yeah,
just
no, good. Keep going. It's good.
so I guess one way is if you make something, you're getting some kind of feedback or some indication. I'm not saying that's the correct way to do it, but let's just say I'm serving a lot of people. I'm getting. I'll buy it. Oh gosh, that sounds great. Whatever is kind of A/B testing the way to go here. Where no, you're not getting the demand. Then you iterate. No demand. You
Yeah.
iterate.
So,
You get. Is it
so
is it a fail
well,
forward process?
there's two parts. So one is, let me see if I can sort of frame out the whole thing because it's a slightly
Yeah,
different
give me the
language.
80/20. What
Yeah.
20% of this
So
is?
here's
Yeah.
here's the first thing to realize as an innovator. Every single person that you're imagining could be your customer, they are insanely expert at their own lives. They just live their lives every day. They're really good at it. And like at any given moment during any given day, they kind of just know what to do. Their bodies just do it. They reach for things, they call people. It's not 100% true. Like if a person goes to a doctor's office and the doctor says, "I'm really sorry you have an incurable cancer." Okay, in that moment, people don't know what to do. But for the most part, most people all day long just know what to do. They're really expert at their lives. And for an innovator to imagine that they could go into someone's life and say, I don't care how expert you think you are in your life. I'm more expert and I can give you something that makes your life better. That's just really unlikely. And so, what you ought to see almost everywhere is actual indifference to whatever you're doing. And that should be the standard. You should just assume that everybody's going to be indifferent to everything you're thinking. And that's a better way to go out as opposed to trying to see whether people would be interested. Just try to figure out how is it they could be disinterested? Like, how are they managing to live their lives without what you're imagining? That's a starting point. And if you go out and you get interested in how it is that they're already okay, you can start to see, well, okay, this is not right, but they seem to be okay with it. So they're really indifferent to it. But this thing over here that they're doing, that's kind of weird. Like, I can't get them to stop doing that. So there must be some reason that I can't get them to stop doing it. There must be something that they're not indifferent to. That gives me a clue about something that they might do something about. Okay, so that's a general frame. So it's subtractive in that way. It's like you're trying to identify the things that they're indifferent to and why, and how they're able to be indifferent. to see what's left, which are the things that they're not indifferent to. And it's almost always like this. It's almost always there's some behavior that they don't change, that they could change, but they don't. Or there's something that they haven't been doing that they could do, but they don't do it. You start to notice those things because in the end, here's what your product always does. In the end, your product enables people to be unstuck in their situation. It just frees them in their situation. It takes away some restraint that they currently feel from going the direction they're currently impelled. So it's always got to be there's some behavior or starting or stopping that your product enables that they can't enable themselves. That's what product always is. So what you're always looking for is, okay, what's a behavior that they're not doing that you can't really understand why, that they ought to start doing it? Or what behavior are they currently doing that seems like they should stop doing it, but they don't stop doing it? And then that's what your product enables. Your product enables the behavior change. Because that's another framing on this, by the way, which people don't seem to really grok, is that you don't get innovation success without getting behavior change. So it really
You
has nothing
don't
to
get
do.
innovation success if you don't get behavior. You mean
No,
behavior
you
change?
positive ways. The only way you can get when you're successful, behaviors change. You got to be true, even if they're just buying from you as opposed to buying from somebody else. Some behavior is going to change, and so why not just really, literally, just pay attention to the behaviors that would have to change, and then you can start to say, well, okay, this behavior that's never going to change, or this behavior that's changeable. So you start to just pay attention to the behaviors.
Give me an example of that. Give me an example of that because you lost me with that.
Yeah, it's hard to give an example. So, well, I don't know. So let's.
And you can make it up.
Well, okay. So you could go look at the person on the boat who's getting drunk in the back of the boat, and you're out there thinking that it's all about
Finding fish.
finding more fish, and you're noticing that they're getting drunk on the back of the boat, and so you're asking yourself, well, okay, that's kind of weird. It's like, if I was right that it's about finding fish, I wouldn't be seeing them getting drunk because when they're drunk, they can't do it. And so I go and see if I can understand how, like, can I stop them from getting drunk? My guess is they'd get pissed off at you if you said, listen, you guys are trying to you bought my fishing thing. You're trying to find fish, but you're getting drunk. It's making you ineffective. My guess is you'd get a strong negative reaction to that. That is, you would discover that it wasn't about finding fish. You would discover that somehow getting drunk was meaningful, and that might lead you to think, oh, wait a minute, this is about recreation. This isn't about finding fish. So I thought it was about finding fish. Now maybe I better think about something else, as an example of a way you might get there.
Is the crux of the matter here observational? In other words, do I need to observe my customers in some fashion, form, either real time or after the fact, as to what they're doing or not doing?
Yeah, so it's a really great question.
How do I information gather to
Yeah,
determine? Yeah,
right. So what we found is it's kind of a question of what relationship ought you have with your customers. And there's a technical term for it, which is you should take a one down power position, which is you're not of value to them right now. And you're kind of wondering, how could you be of value to them? If you just do that, like observing them, I think you're making up all sorts of stories about what you're seeing that are problematic. So it's more like you're trying to show up and push on them in certain ways and see which ways it's okay they let you push and which ways it's not okay for them to let you push. That's what it feels like. It's how can I say this? It's well, first of all, one that just you go into the situation and you're wondering, wow, I'm showing up here and I'm pretty sure they're indifferent to me. Like, how do I know that? Well, they're not asking me for anything. They're not following me home when I leave. So I'm kind of curious, like, how is that possible? So my interactions with them ought to be something like that. It's like, I'm noticing that you're not interested in anything I'm doing. Or I'm noticing that you're doing this, and I'm curious, like, how come you keep doing that and stop doing, you don't stop doing that. You kind of push on things until you push on something and you discover, whoa, they're not going to let you push on that. That reveals to you something about their situation. So that's the kind of thing that you do. I mean, it's hard to say on a podcast in a few minutes, kind of
sure.
how do you take the theory into practice? But what you do learn is you learn to see people in a slightly different way. You start to see how the situation is created. Like the situation could be something physical. The situation could be they had a fight with their spouse. You have to kind of understand in a recreational fishing setting that people have families. Okay, so that's part of the situation. You following me? It's like there are all these things that we know how to do. Some of which is in the book, which is why we wanted to make the book available. So if people were interested, they could try to come deal with us and find out more too.
One of the things I liked about the book, outside of the rubber meets the road practical applications of, what's authentic demand and how do you create that, or how do you how do you discover that? And there's a philosophy in the book, there's this put your ego aside, be open-minded, kind of a beginner's mind aspect that seems to be required to do all this. So if I could just, from a product manager standpoint or a CEO or whatever, humble myself and put the customer first, although these are buzzwords as well, but in reality, like, okay, I'm not going to let my prior experience get in the way of discovering something here. Just that seems like will take you a
No, I
ways
love
into.
that. Yeah, so humility goes a long way. So,
It goes along, especially in this framework that you're presenting. It's like you get out of your own way here and try to get into the shoes of the customer. And that's a terrible way to put it. That's even that you use the word well, which I loved. Right?
Umwelt in the book. Yeah, it's like to get the sense of the customer. Yeah, I think part of the problem with introducing something, we think we're seeing something new. So, when you show up in the world and you say, hey, listen, everything people are doing is interesting. Like people are doing minimum viable products, and they're doing design thinking, and they're doing jobs to be done, and stuff is still not working. We might see why. Like those things are fine; they get you pretty far, but you can still make products that are just that you did by design thinking, then you did iterations around, and people still don't buy. Why? So, like, could you understand what's going on there? And then you show up and you want to show people something they haven't seen before. That's what we're trying to do. So we're saying, okay, well, if every time I describe it, someone turns it into something that they already know, like, it sounds like you're supposed to know your customers better than they know themselves. Absolutely. So your value to them is you know them better than they know themselves. That means that you enable them to do something or stop doing something that they themselves can't start doing or stop doing. That's what it means. And why can you do that? But then the question is, how? So yes, after the fact, it ought to look like they needed it. After the fact, it should be a painkiller rather than a vitamin. After the fact, it should be, it could be clear that the customers better than they know themselves. But what we're trying to show people, we're trying to reveal, we're trying to explain to you, but it's hard, is what's the phenomena that was missing before? Like, what didn't you get if only you think about like people's reaction to your minimum viable product, or if they only react, or if you only sort of framed it as a job to be done. So yes, ultimately, when it works, it's a job to be done. That's true. The problem is there's so many things that are jobs to be done that nobody ever does, that nobody ever reaches for. So what's the difference between jobs to be done and jobs to be done that are authentic demands? That's what we're trying to show people. And the insight is what it's all about is, can people be indifferent? That's what it's about. And so you have to then ask yourself, well, what does it mean to be non-indifferent? And what that means is the alternatives, all of them just don't feel okay. They just won't do the alternatives. And if you start to pay attention to that, you start to get interested. Well, how would I know that? Or what kind of alternatives am I talking about? Or how could I check whether the alternatives are okay? How can I tell the difference between I'm talking and they're just talking? That's what mostly happens. I'm talking and they're just talking back. I go to them and I say, we're doing this. And they say to you, well, that's interesting. Well, how do you charge for it? They couldn't care less. They just know I'm there and they care about me. So they ask me whether, or I talk to, the eBay people and I tell them I can save you $40 million. And they say, well, how much would it cost? And I say 150,000. They say, go make it. How long will it take to make it? So they're just talking. I thought that there was authentic demand, but they were just talking. So now you ask yourself, well, how can I tell a difference? Like, how can I tell when they're actually not indifferent? Like, this is not just talking. Like, if they won't let you take it away, then maybe it's worth understanding why. Like, what goes wrong for them if you don't take it away? If you take it away, that's a good question. But that's the kind of idea that you want to look for.
So there's an interesting, in the book, you talk about how James came to, is it Jim or James?
Jim Balcom.
Jim. How Jim came to realize he wasn't in the fishing technology business. He was in the entertainment business. I thought that was very interesting. And it reminded me of a story, the true story of back in the day, with these people would mail out, and maybe they still do, paper newsletters business. And it was a stock picker. Yeah. It was a stock picker newsletter. I wasn't subscribed to it, but I just read this story where people were subscribing like crazy to the Stock Picker newsletter. It was a certain person, and this person had the way he wrote, and he had a certain personality. And the company that ultimately bought this newsletter looked at the stats on the stock picker, the record for the stock picker. It was horrible. He was a horrible stock picker, but people were
Huh.
buying his newsletter hand over fist. And what
Yes.
they realized was it wasn't the stocks that he was recommending. It was him. It was his personality. It was
Right.
just, they liked, he was motivational. He was encouraging. He was whatever. They liked this guy. It was a personality business, and they thought it was a stock business. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting.
Well, yeah. Here's a weird thing. So I used to do magic and did some street magic and pay attention
Get
to
out.
stage magic. If you watch a magician who's up on stage with a live audience who needs a volunteer to come up, whether it's to pick a card or to stand in a box or something, here's what people have evolved to do. It goes like this: they look at it and they say, "I need a volunteer," and usually people don't volunteer, and they say, "Well, how about you? Would you please stand up?" And a person stands up. Then they say, "Let's give them a hand. Please come on up to the stage." Now it turns out, this is not 100%, but this is kind of what people know. If you were to say, "Okay, you there, please stand up and come to the stage," it turns out people just sit there. Okay, so this is nothing about whether it's good or bad, or there's no value. There's no value proposition that they're coming up on the stage, but the magician constructs the situation in which the person ends up on the stage. So it turns out if you ask a person to please stand up, they don't know what's going on. They can't really help themselves. Before they know it, they're standing up. Now, the magician then has all eyes in the audience directed to them, and they're clapping. And he says, "Now, please come on up." And in that moment, it's really hard for a person to not follow directions. They're getting a lot of, accolades. It'd be weird. So what we do is we end up constructing situations for our customers that enable them to do the behaviors that are meaningful. Now, in that case, it's hard to say that the person in the audience was getting much out of it. It's really all about the magician. But great businesses ought to figure out how it is that the lives of their customers could be improved by behavior changes the customers could get involved in, and then figure out how it is that their product enables that to happen.
One
Yeah,
more
okay.
story,
So,
and you tell me
yes.
if this is informative at all, because
Yeah, please.
it happened to me. So I'm with my friend. We're talking about our various software products, and he's got an analytic platform that interfaces with POS systems, and it's got this great analytics that weren't there. It was kind of user
Okay.
innovation. He was trying to solve his own problem, but he's proxy for maybe other
Okay.
people, right? So he's just kind of getting started, and it has great reports, profitability, you name it. And it's in the kind of cookie bake shop, it's in the cafe type of businesses. But he
Uh-huh.
was thinking about restaurants because similar, but he wasn't expanding to it. So we went to lunch somewhere, and I knew kind of the head person at this particular restaurant I frequent. And we met in there to have lunch. And I said, let me just talk to this person. I walked over and I said, "Hey, my friend has this thing. It connects to the POS. What kind of POS you have, blah, blah, blah." And then I said, "Well, tell me," she goes, "Oh yeah, we've got that with our system." I go, "Well, tell me how it works and what you're using mostly, what." And she started telling me, and then I said, "Do you have it? Is it on your phone?" She goes, "Well, we have these handheld devices." And she pulled it up. And then this was interesting, Merrick. She said, well, the first thing she said when she saw me, she goes, "Oh," she was frustrated. I go, "What are you frustrated about?" 3 people called in. They're not showing up. So I'm short staffed.
Right.
So
Mhm.
then we started talking about her systems, and then she showed me this handheld device. But as we're talking, what came through this conversation was that the biggest problem and what she couldn't live without was how to manage what was going to happen that day when 3 people don't show up, which was not even on my
In your head.
radar. In
Right.
my head or my friend's head, we were like, "What?" So I sat down with them. I go, "Dude, the analytics is not even, somebody's doing it when they get the
They're
time to do it."
okay. I would say they're okay, right? So
Yeah.
that they're okay the way it is. They're already
Yeah.
expert on their lives.
Is that
Right.
kind of in the ballpark of your kind of
Totally.
thesis? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
totally. But then I would also say it's easy to imagine. So she's complaining about these people not showing up. Are they going to close the restaurant? Like,
No, that's what I'm saying. Does lead to a problem that needs to be solved, but
well,
there was a
but they
different.
probably. I'm saying what you start to realize with people is they've already got all their problems solved. So like, okay, now, okay, those three people aren't going to show up.
Oh,
So the first thing she does is she's really upset about it. So how does she handle that? She tells you. Okay, so now that relieves some of her anxiety about it, because probably she should be going and working on it instead of talking to you. So she relieves her. So I'm just saying, you watch people, and they're
mm.
probably still okay. Yes, it's the case that
Oh,
three
that's
people didn't,
interesting. Yeah.
but they're not closing it. And yes, it's the case that other people are going to get, the rest of her serving staff is going to get ticked off. But of course, they'll also get more, they'll be tipped out more because those three people didn't show up. I'm just saying, all these things that look like problems to us from the outside, when you really get into it, everybody more or less has their lives solved already. That's why it actually takes a fair amount of work to start to notice something that they don't actually have under control.
Mm.
Because here's a weird thing. These are all these weird things we discovered, doing this for a decade now, lots and lots of experiences. Here's a weird thing. When someone tells you that something is a problem, it's almost never an authentic demand to solve it.
Really?
And it's so crazy, even if it's their biggest problem. And
Why?
here's why. Here's why. Because it turns out that a good way of solving a problem is to call it a problem. Because you're living your life, and this thing is problematic. And anyone who asks you say, yeah, that's really a problem. And you keep living your life. It's like, here's how you solve the problem. You label it as a problem, and you don't have to do anything more about it. We all have problems. Like, I have a problem getting home on time. I have a problem preparing dinner. There's all these problems. But, it's just weird that people's problems, the minute they're labeled as problems, they can kind of be contained like this. It's strange. So, it's one of the things that I find funny is that people say, go ask people what their biggest problems are. And they do. And then they make something which solves their biggest problem. And they discover that's just what they called it. Like this happens. I can't tell you how often this happens. Someone will come in and say, I have this great technological ability. Right now, I've found that our clients are spending 6 hours, 6 miserable hours with these horrible spreadsheets. And there's like one person in the company who absolutely hates it. And I asked this person about their job, and they say, well, they really want to be doing other stuff, but they're spending 6 hours on this horrible spreadsheet problem. And we can go and make that be like one push button. Our software will figure out the answer. And they do that. Then they go and they sell that idea. And here's what they discover: nobody cares. And then they dig and they dig and they dig, and they almost always find the following. You know what? That person who complained that that was a problem and they hate doing it, they're the only person in the company who knows how to do that. It's like job security. And they're sort of proud of the fact that they can wrangle this thing, and they always complain about it. You get paid more because they're people. Anyway, so it's like, it's not really a problem. It's like, it's actually how they go about living their lives is doing that.
Mm.
And they call it a problem. So what you're really looking for is something where, you know what? This is not how they want to live their lives, but this is what they do. And then you free them to live their lives the way they're really drawn to live their life. That's what you're looking for
Mm.
that's what you're looking for. And so a lot of these little tells are, and what's weird about this stuff too is it should sound counterintuitive, because it's not what people are currently doing. And what people are currently doing is ending up making things that people are indifferent to. So it ought to be the case we're saying something different, and it should strike, it should be a little weird.
Mm.
Um, you know, because if the other stuff worked, I would say we wouldn't go down this path, but it seems
Mm.
like the other stuff's not working. The thing that's problematic is that people can be indifferent to you. That's and that trying to explain why they're going to do something, you're better off trying to understand why the alternative is not going to be okay. And it doesn't feel right, but it's logically right.
And that's my takeaway from that, is that kind of the alternatives, right? Is it, or are they okay? And what are
Yeah,
they?
just ask about the
Yeah.
alternatives,
Yeah.
and are those okay? And if
Yeah.
they are, got to find something else, or find
Yeah.
a way to make it so the alternatives aren't okay.
So people can find the book anywhere, but if they want to
Oh
find
yeah,
you or contact you.
Amazon. Yeah, if you want to find me, it's first name last name at Gmail is fine. The book is available on Amazon. It's also, we now have for those of you who like to read by listening, it's now available on Audible, just as of last week. It's called The Heart of Innovation, and we try to make it readable with stories. So, and they're new, they're kind of fresh. They're definitely, so maybe it's sort of in the category of if you got something by reading Crossing the Chasm, this is trying to give you a framework that's kind of like that. Not all things that you haven't thought of, but maybe a way to think about some of the things you have thought about a little more clearly. That was our goal with this.
Merrick, thank you so much again. I appreciate it.
Nice to
Great
meet you.
conversation. Take care.
Here.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, do share it with your friends and on your social platforms. Big thanks to Sam Williams, my audio guy, and the beautiful bumper music you're hearing is Michael Petrovich's Bella Luna. For all my show notes or resource links, visit LarryWeeks.com, and we will talk again soon.